I'm a medical student, and ever since I was young, my elders in the family would often tell me, many times, you shouldn't frighten yourself. Because on the second floor of our house, we have a shrine dedicated to gods and ancestors. The spirits from outside cannot enter the house. Because of this, when I was little, I used to sneak a lot of horror movies late at night. Scared myself half to death, and then ran to sleep under the Buddhist altar table. The next day, I would always be nagged by my mom and grandmother. As I grew older, I no longer held fear towards the existence of certain spiritual realms. Because I know I have deities as my source of support. Sometimes the presence of those spiritual realms conveys to me the feeling that they are following me, perhaps out of some kind of necessity. There's no threat. Instead, I feel sympathy for them. When I went to university, studying human anatomy was the course I was most anticipating at that time. With a sense of deep respect, I stood in front of the body of our deceased teacher. In my heart, I silently thanked the teachers, saying, "Thank you for your selflessness. I will study hard to make your sacrifice worthwhile." During the autopsy, my thirst for knowledge about the human body surpassed my fear of death and cadavers. After the first anatomy class ended, I took off my gloves and washed my hands at the sink. Perhaps influenced by the environment, I felt particularly exhausted that day. When I finally left the anatomy classroom, I had the feeling that lonely and dark corridor was filled with scattered figures wandering about. From the corner of my eye, I vaguely saw 5 people standing at the entrance of the anatomy classroom. Coincidentally, the number of anatomy teachers that day was exactly 5. I was startled at first, but quickly came to my senses. I thought, those must be the 5 anatomy teachers. I smiled and said silently in my heart, "Thank you, dear teachers." Unexpectedly, as I took my leave from school, something peculiar happened. When I was about to start my scooter, I suddenly felt like someone had taken a seat behind me. Initially, I didn't think too much of it, assuming I was merely fatigued. But at a crossroad just before reaching home, while I waited for the traffic light, as the light turned green, my hand seemed to be held by someone, forcing the throttle down hard. I saw myself about to crash into a roadside pole. I struggled to release the throttle and hit the brakes. Simultaneously, I noticed a dark figure in the rearview mirror. I started to feel a mix of fear and suspicion. Because I saw the teachers in the classroom in their complete forms, but this dark figure was formless. It also gave me a strong sense of hostility. So, I could only cautiously return home. Upon arrival, I took my spare clothes along with my lab coat, planning to take a bath upstairs. I also intended to purify my lab coat at the shrine on my way. As I started to ascend the staircase to the second floor, my heart suddenly raced, and there was a surge of adrenaline, yet my limbs felt weak. With each step I took, inexplicably, I began to feel fear towards my childhood sanctuary, as though I didn't belong here. A sense of alienation overcame me. By the time I reached the second floor, the feeling of weakness had vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of oppression. The space seemed brighter and increasingly crowded. Just as I let out a sigh of relief, the next second, I began vomiting violently. Despite not having dinner yet, I threw up pile after pile of black and foul-smelling vomit, while I was puzzling over the fact that, as a vegetarian who had never consumed meat or strong spices, I couldn't understand why my vomit was full of a meaty smell. The next moment, I directly lost consciousness. When I woke up, I found myself on my bed, sprawled in an ungainly position. I woke up sore and aching. Opening my bedroom door, everything at home was as usual. My family was having breakfast and watching TV. It seemed like all that happened yesterday was a dream. I had no choice but to silently prepare for a bath. But as I walked towards the bathroom, my grandfather called out to me. He asked me where I had been yesterday. I told my grandfather about my experience at the anatomy class yesterday. My grandfather then said, "We usually have only 2 or 3 heavenly soldiers guarding our home. But when you came back yesterday, more than 10 appeared lined up in front of the shrine. The entity that followed you home was apparently your debtor from past lives." At this point, I was perplexed. Why, despite the presence of gods and Buddhas here, could those so-called debt-ridden antagonists of mine still get in? Why could my alleged debtor enter when we have deities and Buddha here? My grandfather shook his head and said, they were also investigating the matter, but that spirit's obsession was too strong, thus they had to summon other deities to stand guard first. Finally, my grandfather smiled and said, "Anyway, as long as it's resolved now, all is well." That night, I had a dream. In it, I saw a person that looked very much like me, but he was dressed in clothing from the late Qing dynasty. I immediately thought he was probably my past self. The era seemed to be filled with upheavals and war. I was wandering aimlessly in the forest, avoiding the war. Eventually, I approached a small house, where suddenly, a man leaning on a crutch emerged. With trembling hands, he informed me his wife was about to give birth, and asked me to carry her down the mountain to a doctor. I immediately told the man that I was a doctor, and then instructed him to prepare some tools. However, when I saw his wife, I realized the situation was already quite grave. After explaining the risks to the man, he nervously acknowledged that no matter the outcome, he wouldn't blame me. Left with no other option, I proceeded. In the end, both the mother and the child passed away. The man behind me was breaking down, screaming in despair. In the next moment, he grabbed a pair of scissors, and while I was unequipped, he plunged them straight into my neck. In the end, he chose suicide. As he did, he told my past self's lifeless body, "No matter how many lives, I will never forgive you." And then I woke up. Upon awakening, I felt my heart racing, accompanied with cold sweat pouring down. After calming down, I couldn't help but swear to myself inwardly. After all, in the dream, I had explained all the risks to the man, and he said he understood and would not blame me. Who would have thought you would end up harboring such resentment? If it weren't for the deities in my home, I might have been harmed by now.
If you like and want to see more of my videos faster, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and hit the like.